The wind came hard across the Wyoming plain that evening, cold enough to sting the lungs, cold enough to make old wood complain beneath its nails. Clara Whitmore leaned her shoulder against the broken gate and pushed with everything left in her body. The hinge groaned. Snow moved across the fields in thin white ribbons. Her boots slipped in the mud. For a moment she nearly fell, but she caught herself before the children saw. That mattered to her. The lantern in her hand shook softly in the wind. Its weak yellow glow reached only a few feet across the dark. Behind her, the farmhouse stood tired beneath the storm clouds. One upstairs window glowed faintly. Ben was watching from there again. He always watched now, ever since his father died. Clara pushed the gate closed one more time and tied the rope tighter around the post. Her fingers were red from cold. The right glove had split at the thumb nearly 2 weeks ago. She still had not replaced it. The horses shifted nervously inside the barn. The storm was coming earlier this year. She could feel it in the air. The whole ranch felt tired. The fences leaned. The well froze twice already that month. Half the north pasture had gone dry, and the bank had stopped pretending patience. Clara lifted the lantern higher and looked across the dark land. This place used to sound different. There used to be laughter coming from the porch, her husband Samuel singing badly while fixing tack in the evenings, coffee boiling on the stove, boots by the front door that were not hers alone. Now the wind filled all those spaces instead. She swallowed once and walked toward the house. Inside, warmth barely held together against the cold. The fire in the stove burned low. May sat asleep with her cheek against the table. Ben tried to keep reading beside the lamp, but his eyes kept drifting toward the empty chair at the head of the table. Samuel's chair. Clara removed her coat slowly. "You eat already?" Ben asked quietly. She nodded. It was a lie. The soup pot held barely enough for the children. Ben looked at her for a second longer than usual. He knew, but he lowered his eyes and said nothing. That was the thing grief did to children. It made them older without permission. Clara poured soup into 2 bowls. Thin broth, a few potatoes, nothing more. May woke when Clara brushed her hair gently back from her forehead. "Supper time," Clara whispered. The little girl blinked sleep from her eyes. "Is it snowing?" "Yes." "Will the porch light stay on?" Clara looked toward the front window. The small lantern beside the porch still glowed against the darkness. Even now, even when lamp oil cost too much, even when she should have saved every penny. "Yes," Clara said softly. "It'll stay on." Samuel used to say no one should come home to darkness, and somehow Clara could not bring herself to let that light die. Not yet. The room stayed quiet, except for spoons touching bowls. Outside, the wind grew louder. Ben looked toward the barn. "The north fence won't hold another storm." "I know." And the water trough froze again. "I know." He looked guilty for saying it, like problems themselves were burdens he carried to her. Clara reached over and adjusted the blanket around May's shoulders. "Your children," she said gently. "Let me worry about grown things." But after they slept, she sat alone at the kitchen table long after midnight. The bank letter remained unfolded beside the lamp. Final notice. Repair the north water line before winter, or surrender a portion of the land against debt. She stared at the paper until the words blurred. Then finally she folded it again. Outside, snow covered the porch step in silence. The porch light burned steadily against the dark. Clara watched it through the window, then lowered her head into her hands for only a moment. Just one moment, before morning came again. The next day, the road into town was nearly frozen solid. Clara wrapped scarves around the children before leaving them with Mrs. Keller from the neighboring farm. She hated asking for help, but she had eggs to sell and quilts, and there was flour to buy before prices climbed again. The wagon wheel started giving trouble halfway to town. A sharp grinding sound, then a pull to the left. Clara sighed quietly beneath her breath. Not now. Please not now. But by the time she reached the main street, the wheel had nearly locked completely. The town moved around her without slowing. Men carried feed sacks. Store owners swept snow from their steps. 2 ranch hands glanced at her wagon and kept walking. A widow with failing land was not unusual anymore. People learned to stop looking too long at hard things. Clara crouched beside the wheel. The axle pin had slipped loose. Mud covered the spoke. Cold soaked through her skirt immediately. She tried lifting the wheel herself once. Nothing. Again. Still nothing. A shadow stopped beside her. Large boots. Weathered coat. No hurry in the movement. Clara looked up carefully. The man standing there was broad-shouldered and quiet-faced. older than most cowhands, dark beard touched with winter gray. His gloves were worn nearly through at the palms. He looked at the wheel first, not at her. Axel shifted, he said calmly. She nodded once. I can manage. He crouched anyway, did not argue, did not pity her, just removed his gloves and reached beneath the wagon. Strong hands, steady hands, a man used to fixing things alone. Clara stepped back slightly. Snow drifted across the street around them. The man worked without wasting motion. After a minute, he looked toward the horse. She's favoring her right leg. Clara blinked. Most men had not even noticed. She started limping yesterday. He stood and moved toward the mare slowly, so he would not startle her. The horse relaxed almost immediately beneath his hand. That told Clara something. Animals always knew first. The man checked the hoof carefully. Loose nail. You can tell from that far. He shrugged once. Usually. A few minutes later, he tightened the axle pin, adjusted the wheel, then fixed the horseshoe nail with calm precision. No performance, no unnecessary talking, just work. When he finally stepped back, Clara reached for her coin purse, but he shook his head. No need. You fixed both. He wiped mud from his hands with an old cloth. You've got children in that wagon. That was all he said. Then he lifted a small canvas sack from beside his saddle and placed it on the wagon seat. What's this? Fence nails. I can't take those. You'll need them before snow comes. His voice stayed even, not forceful, not soft, simply certain. Clara looked at him properly then. There was something tired in his face, not weakness, just the kind of quiet that came after years alone. What's your name? She asked. Elias Boone. She recognized it vaguely. The rancher from North Ridge country, the one people said lived alone near the mountain pass. Before she could answer, he picked up his gloves. Then he noticed the lantern hanging beside the wagon seat. The hook holding it had nearly snapped. Without a word, he took a small tool from his pocket and tightened the metal clasp carefully. His fingers moved slowly because of the cold. When he finished, he stepped back once more. There, Clara touched the lantern handle lightly. Thank you. He nodded once, then walked toward his horse. No lingering, no smile meant to charm her, just a man leaving after the work was done. That should have been the end of it. But that night, while snow tapped softly against the windows, Clara noticed something strange. The lantern beside the porch no longer tilted sideways in the wind. The hook held firm now, steady, like someone had quietly repaired a thing she stopped believing could stay fixed. 3 days later, the water froze again. Clara woke before dawn to silence in the pipes. She stood in the kitchen staring at the basin while cold spread through the room. Not again. She pulled on boots and coat over her nightdress and stepped into the dark morning. The sky was still blue-black with early dawn. Her breath fogged heavily. The pump handle would not move, frozen solid. Clara pressed her eyes shut briefly, then grabbed the iron wrench. She worked nearly 20 minutes in the freezing wind before her fingers lost feeling. That was when she heard horse steps behind her, slow, unhurried. She turned. Elias Boone dismounted beside the fence carrying a toolbox. No dramatic greeting, just a small nod. You're up early. So are you, she answered. He glanced once at the frozen line, then at her bare red hands. You should go inside. It needs fixing. It'll still need fixing in 5 minutes. She hesitated, then finally stepped back. Elias crouched near the pipe. Steam escaped his mouth in slow clouds while he worked. The sound of metal against frozen bolts carried softly through the morning. Clara stood on the porch, holding her coat tighter around herself. From upstairs, she saw Ben watching through the curtain again, watching the stranger, watching his mother. After nearly an hour, water suddenly burst through the pipe with a rough sputtering sound. The trough began filling again. Elias tightened the last valve and stood. That line's too shallow for winter, he said. Needs burying deeper come spring. Clara nodded. Most people spoke to her like she already failed. He spoke like things could still be repaired. That felt different. She opened the front door slightly. There's coffee. He looked toward the house, then toward his horse, as if deciding whether stepping closer might disturb something. Finally, he removed his gloves. All right. Inside, warmth gathered softly around the stove. May stared openly at him from the table. Ben pretended not to. Elias sat near the door instead of at the table itself. Mud still clung to his boots. Clara poured coffee quietly. The steam rose between them. Nobody rushed conversation. Nobody filled silence just to avoid it. That made the room feel strangely peaceful. You live alone? Ben finally asked. Clara almost corrected him for being rude, but Elias answered first. Yes. Ben nodded slowly. Then after a minute asked, Don't you get lonely?" The room grew still. Elias looked down at the coffee in his hands. Sometimes, no long speech, no sadness performed aloud. Just truth. Something in Clara's chest tightened unexpectedly. May slid half a biscuit across the table toward him. "You can have mine." A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Thank you." That was the first time Clara saw warmth reach his face. And somehow the kitchen looked less empty because of it. Over the next weeks, he returned without announcement, sometimes to fix fence posts, sometimes to repair hinges, sometimes simply because something needed doing. And he had noticed before she asked. One afternoon, Clara came outside carrying laundry and found the north gate rehung properly. Another morning, the barn roof no longer leaked above the feed corner. He never asked for payment, never stayed longer than necessary. But slowly traces of him began appearing around the ranch. Fresh chopped wood stacked near the porch, tools left drying beside the barn, horse tracks in the snow before sunrise. The children began listening for those tracks, especially Ben. One evening, Clara found her son sitting beside Elias, near the stable, while they repaired an old saddle strap together. Ben talked more that night than he had in months, mostly about horses. Elias listened carefully, not pretending interest, real interest. That mattered to boys. Clara stood unseen for a moment in the barn doorway. Lantern light swayed softly overhead. Dust floated gold through the air. Ben laughed quietly at something. The sound nearly broke her heart, because she realized how long it had been since she heard it. Later that night, Elias prepared to leave before the snow deepened. Clara handed him a wrapped cloth bundle. "What's this?" "Supper leftovers. You don't have enough to spare." "We managed." He looked at her a long second, not arguing, not accepting quickly either. Then finally, he took it carefully. Their fingers brushed once in the cold air. Neither spoke. The porch light burned above them, soft gold against the dark Wyoming night. And for the first time in a very long while, the ranch no longer felt entirely alone. Winter settled over the valley slowly after that, not all at once. The cold deepened day by day, until the mornings carried a silence so sharp it seemed to ring across the fields. By December, Elias Boone no longer knocked before entering the barn. He still knocked before entering the house, but the barn had become familiar ground between them. Shared work, shared quiet. One afternoon, Clara stood at the kitchen counter kneading bread, while snow drifted outside the windows in soft gray waves. May colored beside the stove. Ben sat on the floor repairing leather reins under Elias's instruction. "Not too tight," Elias said calmly. "Leather cracks when pride pulls harder than patience." Ben frowned in concentration. "Like horses." "Like most things." Clara hid a faint smile. The room smelled like yeast and wood smoke. Warmth gathered low beneath the ceiling beams. For a while nobody spoke, and somehow that silence no longer felt empty. It felt lived in. That evening the wind rose hard against the house. The porch light flickered outside the window. Elias stood automatically. "I'll fix it." "You just sat down," Clara said. He pulled on his coat anyway. Storms picking up. She watched him disappear into the dark, while snow whipped across the porch boards. A few minutes later, the light steadied again, golden, constant. When he stepped back inside, cold air followed him through the doorway. May looked up from her blanket. "You always fix things." Elias removed his gloves slowly. "Not always, but you try." He looked at the little girl for a second, then nodded once. "Yes." Clara placed a bowl of stew in front of him before he asked. That was new too. She no longer asked whether he planned to stay for supper. She simply set another bowl down, like his place at the table had slowly existed, long before either of them admitted it. Later that night, Ben fell asleep in the rocking chair beside the stove, the book still open across his chest. Elias rose quietly and lifted the boy carefully into his arms. Ben did not wake. Clara watched from the kitchen doorway. There was something unbearably gentle in the way Elias carried him upstairs, like a man holding something fragile he never expected to trust himself with again. When he returned downstairs, Clara had already banked the fire lower. The house glowed dim beneath lantern light. Snow pressed softly against the windows. "You didn't have to do all this alone," Elias said quietly. Clara kept folding dishcloths. "For a while I did." He nodded. No pity, no speech about strength, just understanding. That felt rarer. The clock ticked softly between them. Finally, Clara sat down across from him. "He used to leave that porch light burning every night," she said. Elias stayed still. Samuel, she nodded. He said people ought to see light when they come home. Her hands rested quietly in her lap. For months after he died, I nearly stopped lighting it. She swallowed once. But Ben cried the first night I forgot. Outside, the wind brushed snow against the porch steps. Elias looked toward the window, then toward the lamp. He was right, he said softly. Clara looked at him then, really looked at him, not as a man helping around the ranch, not as a visitor, but as someone who understood grief without needing it, explained. That frightened her a little, because comfort could become dependence before a lonely heart noticed. The next morning she handed him a small iron key near the barn. Elias frowned slightly. What's this? Tool shed. You don't have to. The hinges stick in winter. She paused. And you already know where everything is anyway. Something quiet passed between them then. Trust. Not spoken aloud, but real enough to change the air around them. That same week, the first trouble arrived. Walter Grady came riding onto the ranch just before sunset. 3 men behind him. Expensive coat, silver saddle, the kind of ranch owner who wore polished boots on land. Other people worked bloody to survive. Clara saw him from the porch, and her shoulders stiffened immediately. Elias noticed. Who is it? Trouble, she answered softly. Grady removed his gloves slowly as he approached the porch. Mrs. Whitmore. Mr. Grady. His eyes moved across the property with practiced calculation. The barn, the fencing, the frozen north pasture, then finally toward Elias, standing near the woodpile. I hear the bank sold your debt. Clara folded her arms against the cold. I heard the same. Grady smiled faintly. I'm prepared to make things easier for you. I doubt that. His smile thinned. The winter's going to bury small ranches like this one. He glanced toward the children watching from inside the window. You've got young mouths to think about. Clara stayed silent. I could buy the land now, Grady continued. Fair price. Enough for you and their children to relocate somewhere easier. Kansas. That word sat unspoken between them. Clara's sister lived there. Small house. No ranch. No Wyoming sky. No Samuel. No porch light. Nothing that still felt like home. I'm not selling, she said calmly. Grady's eyes shifted toward Elias again. And you, he said. You planning to freeze beside her? Elias did not answer immediately. He split another piece of wood first. The crack echoed sharply through the cold evening. Then he set the axe down. I'm planning supper. Ben nearly smiled at that. But Grady did not. The man mounted his horse again with slow irritation. You can't rescue every broken ranch in this valley. Boone. Elias looked at him evenly. Good thing this one isn't broken. Grady rode away without another word, but the cold left behind felt heavier afterward. That night, Clara barely touched her food. After the children slept, she found Elias outside reinforcing the barn door against the wind. You should have let him buy it, Elias said quietly. She looked up sharply. You mean that? No. The hammer struck wood again. But men like him don't stop coming once they smell weakness. Clara wrapped her coat tighter. I'm tired of people looking at this place like it's already dead. Elias drove another nail into the frame. It doesn't look dead to me. She looked toward him slowly. Snow rested across his shoulders. His hands were rough from cold and work. Everything about him felt steady, dangerously steady. The kind of steady a lonely woman could lean on too much. That scared her. A few days later, word spread through town that a cattle operation in Montana was hiring winter foremen. Good money, warm housing, long contracts. Someone mentioned Elias Boone, already received an offer. Clara heard it while buying flour. She thanked the shopkeeper calmly, then drove home through falling snow without speaking once. That evening, Elias arrived near dusk, carrying feed sacks for the horses. Clara met him near the porch. You got an offer in Montana. He looked at her carefully. Yes, you should take it. The words sounded colder than she intended. He set the sacks down quietly. Maybe. You'd make real money there. Maybe. The porch light swayed softly above them. Clara hated how much she suddenly noticed that light whenever he stood beneath it. You don't owe us anything, she said. Something moved behind his eyes then. Not anger, something sadder. I know. She nodded once, then went inside before her face betrayed too much. That night, she sat awake long after the children slept. The house felt different now whenever he left. Too quiet, like something important had begun missing before it was even gone. Downstairs, the rocking chair moved slightly from the draft near the stove. Elias had repaired that chair weeks ago. Now Ben refused letting anyone else sit in it. Outside, The porch light still burned against the snow. Steady, waiting. 3 mornings later, Elias loaded supplies onto his horse before sunrise. The Montana job started within the week. Ben stood near the barn, pretending to help with tack, but his hands moved too slowly. Finally, he asked without looking up, "You coming back after winter?" Elias tightened a saddle strap carefully. "I don't know." Ben nodded once, trying hard to act older than he was. "That's all right," but his voice cracked anyway. Elias looked at the boy for a long moment, then crouched slightly to meet his eyes. "Take care of your mother while I'm gone." Ben swallowed hard. "I did before, too." The words hit harder than the child intended. Elias rested one rough hand briefly against the boy's shoulder, then stood again. Clara watched from the porch, unseen. Her chest ached with something she refused naming. By afternoon, the storm arrived. Hard, fast. The kind Wyoming ranchers feared all winter. Snow hammered sideways across the fields. The north fence gave out just before dark. Ben burst through the front door breathless. The horses. Clara grabbed her coat immediately, but before she could step outside, another sound reached them through the storm. Horse hooves. Fast. A rider cutting through snow toward the ranch. The door opened hard against the wind. Elias stepped inside, covered white from shoulders to boots, breathing hard. I saw the fence down. For one suspended second, nobody moved. Then May ran straight into him, small arms wrapping around his frozen coat. "You came back." The room went completely still. Elias closed his eyes briefly, before resting one hand against the little girl's back. Outside, the storm raged harder. Inside, the porch light burned warm against the dark. And for the first time since Samuel Whitmore died, Clara no longer felt like she was the only adult standing between her children and the cold world outside. Hours later, the horses were secured, the barn reinforced. The storm still howled beyond the walls. Everyone sat exhausted near the stove, May asleep against Clara's shoulder, Ben half asleep beside the fire. Elias stood near the porch door, adjusting the lantern hook, where the wind had loosened it again, always fixing things quietly. Clara watched him for a long time before speaking. "You were halfway to Montana." "Yes." "You turned around because of a fence." He looked toward her, then. Snow melted slowly from his coat onto the floorboards. "No," he said softly. The room stayed silent. Then Clara rose and crossed toward him slowly. The fire crackled low behind them. Wind pressed softly against the windows. "The children need you too," she said. Not dramatic, not desperate, just honest. The kind of honesty loneliness finally speaks when it grows too tired to hide. Elias looked past her toward the kitchen, toward the rocking chair, toward the table with 4 bowls instead of 3, toward the porch light glowing warm beyond the glass. Home, maybe the first real one he had seen in years. He removed his gloves slowly, then set them beside the door, like a man who no longer planned leaving anytime soon. "Need me to chop more wood before supper?" he asked quietly. Clara smiled then, small, tired, real, and somehow that smile warmed the old ranch more than the fire ever could. Outside, snow continued falling across the Wyoming night, but inside the Whitmore house, the light stayed on, and nobody sat alone anymore. If this story kept you watching until the end, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories.